Welcome to today's historical deep dive, where we peel back the layers of legend to find the human, and sometimes flawed, core of history's giants. Prepare to step into the mind of a man who conquered nations, only to find his greatest enemy wasn't an army, but the sea itself, and perhaps his own boundless belief. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin and change the way you think about history. You stand in a dimly lit room, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of burning oil lamps. It is late 1807. Outside, your empire stretches from the Atlantic coast of Spain all the way to the frozen edge of the Vistula River, a colossus forged in fire and built on sheer will, fueled by unparalleled military genius. Kings across Europe bow before you. Emperors negotiate treaties on your terms. And the continent trembles at the mere mention of your name. You have reshaped the map with strokes of a pen as decisive as any cannonball. Yet, despite the treaties signed, the borders redrawn countless times, and the armies of your rivals repeatedly vanquished on the field, one persistent shadow remains stubbornly unbowed across a narrow stretch of water: Britain. Across the English Channel, the island nation finances your enemies with relentless efficiency, disrupting your burgeoning continental trade, and openly mocks your dominance on land with the undeniable, almost mythical power of its invincible navy. They are an anvil you cannot strike directly. You cannot cross the water to deliver the decisive blow. Therefore, you conclude, you must crush them economically. This moment, this strategic pivot from outright military conquest to economic strangulation via the grand, ambitious design of the Continental System, is subtle, almost quiet in its execution, yet profoundly significant. It marks a fundamental shift in the very nature of your struggle. You are no longer merely defending the revolutionary ideals you once championed, or consolidating French power within traditional geographical bounds inherited from kings. You are attempting to reshape the fundamental flow of global commerce, to impose your will not just on armies and governments and physical territory, but on markets, on merchants trading spices and textiles, and on the very movement of ships across the sea itself. This is where your boundless ambition, until this point your greatest, most terrifyingly effective weapon, begins to stretch beyond the realm of the possible and venture perilously into the territory of divine overreach. You are no longer content to be just a general or a consul, or even an emperor presiding over lands. You are attempting to become the economic architect of the world, a challenge that begins to reveal a blind spot even a mind as brilliant and disciplined as yours possesses: the inability to accept limits, geographical, economic, or otherwise. Ask yourself, was this brilliance or hubris? The true scene of consequence isn't a battlefield this time. It's this map room, the scratch of a pen as a decree is signed, a quiet decision that will ripple outwards, twisting alliances, crippling economies, and ultimately setting the stage for the cracks that will eventually splinter your vast creation. The scent of damp stone hangs in the air of the Tuileries. Rewind just a few years from the battlefield dominance you now command. France, the nation you profess to love, lies bleeding. The Directory, a revolving door of the corrupt and the feckless, presides over chaos. Internal factions tear at each other's throats, while external enemies circle like vultures. The revolution's promise has soured. The liberty it brought feels like anarchy to a weary populace. You, Napoleon Bonaparte, a name still relatively new on the grand stage, but one etched in victories, see the vacuum. You feel the impossible fire in your gut, not just for glory, but for order. The coup of 18 Brumaire, November 9th, 1799, is not a sudden, spontaneous uprising. It is a meticulously planned seizure of power, executed with the precision of a military campaign, but in the political arena. You walk into the Council of 500, a room buzzing with talkers, schemers, ideologues. They shout, they threaten, they are trapped in revolutionary rhetoric, while the nation founders. You are almost overwhelmed, physically attacked by deputies wielding daggers, a moment of near disaster that requires your brother Lucien to rally the soldiers outside. The coup succeeds not through elegant debate, but through the blunt instrument of military force, backing your assertion of authority. You sweep aside the endless committees, the indecision, replacing it with a single driving will, yours. This act is more than a political maneuver. It is a profound demonstration of a fundamental leadership insight. In moments of deep crisis, when institutions crumble and uncertainty reigns, people crave strength, clarity, and decisive action. They look for the indispensable man, the one who can cut through the noise and fix things. You positioned yourself perfectly as that figure. The years that follow, the consulate, are a blur of relentless construction. You bring stability. You codify the laws of the land into the enduring Napoleonic code. You build roads and canals. You centralize administration, creating the modern French state from the ashes of the old regime and the chaos of the new. This isn't just effective governance. It is a deliberate performance of competence and indispensability, solidifying your hold on power and manufacturing the consent of a nation desperate for peace and prosperity. By 1804, the stage is set for the ultimate act of self-affirmation. The republic you swore allegiance to is quietly dismantled. The emperor steps forward. The coronation ceremony in Notre Dame is steeped in tradition. Yet you twist it to serve a revolutionary purpose. The Pope, Pius VII, is present, lending an air of legitimacy, but his traditional role is usurped. As the crown is brought forth, intended to be placed on your head by the pontiff, you reach out. You take the imperial crown into your own hands, heavy with gold and expectation, and place it firmly upon your head yourself. Then you crown your empress, Josephine. This wasn't mere arrogance. It was a calculated political statement witnessed by the world. You did not rule by divine right, bestowed by the Church and God. You ruled by your own right, earned, you believed, through merit, through victory on the battlefield, and through the popular acclaim of the plebiscites you engineered. It is the logical conclusion of Brumaire. Authority flows not from history, not from inherited privilege, and not even truly from the consent you claimed, but from your own will and capability. Here lies a critical and perhaps tragic seed, planted at the moment of your greatest triumph. While decisive action and belief in one's ability are essential for overcoming crisis and driving progress, the act of self-coronation, literal or figurative, can foster a dangerous illusion. It plants the belief that your authority stems solely from yourself, from your own inherent brilliance and strength. This makes you less likely to listen to dissenting voices, less open to counsel, and tragically, more susceptible to believing in your own infallibility. Ask yourself, when does self-reliance become self-delusion? When does the indispensable man become the man who believes he can never be wrong? The crown you placed on your own head was not just a symbol of power, it was a self-imposed barrier against external wisdom. You are on a raft, built specifically for this moment, floating on the frigid Niemen River. It is June 1807. On one side approaches Tsar Alexander I, inheritor of a lineage stretching back centuries, the absolute ruler of a colossus nation. On the other side, you arrive, the former Corsican artillery officer, the architect of your own destiny, now Emperor of the French, master of continental Europe. The air crackles not just with the summer chill, but with the tension of two worlds meeting. You step onto the raft, offering warmth, charm, flattery, a dazzling display of personal diplomacy calculated to disarm the young, impressionable Tsar. This is not a negotiation between equals. This is a performance of dominance veiled in cordiality. Here, on a hastily constructed stage in the middle of a river, you redraw the map of Europe. Prussia, your recent enemy, is dismembered, its territories parceled out or turned into new kingdoms for your allies and family. Russia, though defeated, is treated not as a vanquished foe, but as a prospective partner. You speak of shared spheres of influence, of carving up continents, of mutual glory. It feels utterly intoxicating. You believe you have won over the East with a handshake and shared dreams of empire. The Third Coalition is shattered, Austria humbled, Prussia crippled, and now Russia is seemingly bound to your will through personal chemistry and grand promises. This is the absolute peak of your diplomatic and military power converging. You are dictating terms to an emperor, not requesting them. Your vision of a restructured Europe, a grand design with France at its heart and Bonaparte's on peripheral thrones, seems breathtakingly close to reality. You believe your sheer force of will, proven time and again on a dozen battlefields, can bend even the vast, enigmatic force of Russia to your purposes. But here lies the critical misjudgment, the subtle thread of tragic irony weaving through this moment of triumph. Deals struck from overwhelming strength, based primarily on personal charm and flattery, rather than genuine, shared strategic interests, are not solid foundations. They are palaces built on sand. Your charisma captivated Alexander on that raft, but it did not fundamentally alter Russia's deep-seated geopolitical ambitions or erase the underlying distrust that lingered behind the Tsar's facade of admiration. You convinced yourself that a personal bond, a shared drawing of lines on a map, could truly bind such disparate and powerful entities. It was a profound underestimation, born of the very hubris this moment of absolute power fostered. Ask yourself, when you hold all the cards, is it brilliance to charm your opponent, or hubris to believe they are truly won over? The cause-effect is stark. Your belief in your own irresistible influence prevented you from seeing the storm clouds gathering beneath the clear sky of Tilsit. You turn from the stormy English Channel, the unassailable British fleet a constant, defiant gray line on the horizon. Direct invasion is a dream denied by cold, hard naval reality. But you are Napoleon Bonaparte. You do not accept defeat, you simply change the rules of the game. If you cannot strike Britain directly, you will starve the very source of its power, its trade. Thus unfolds your grand design, war waged not with cannon and cavalry, but with ledgers and port closures. The Continental System. You declare total economic war. Across every port, every coastline under French control or influence, The decree rings out. No British goods allowed. The continent becomes a vast economic fortress, ostensibly impenetrable to the island nation's commerce. Your allies, your satellite kingdoms, your conquered territories, all are compelled, often brutally, to participate in this monumental embargo. It is a breathtakingly ambitious stroke, a continent-wide tourniquet designed to choke the life out of the British economy. You envision silent factories in Manchester, empty docks in London, bankrupt merchants, and a desperate populace turning on their government, forcing them to the negotiating table on your terms. This move reveals a fascinating layer of your strategic mind, the attempt to weaponize economics on a global scale, to turn trade itself into a political and military tool. You saw the power of Britain's commerce, but you fundamentally misjudged its intricate organic nature. Markets are not like armies. They resist absolute command. They flow like water, finding every crack and crevice. The immediate, inevitable consequence? Smuggling becomes a massive, booming industry, a shadow economy thriving under the very nose of your rigid control. Even worse, your own allies, nations like Holland and Russia, suffer immensely. Their economies, long dependent on British trade or the colonial goods transported by British ships, sugar, coffee, cotton, are throttled. Resentment quietly simmers and grows louder than any whispered conspiracy. This phase of your rule highlights a profound, perhaps tragic, irony. In seeking total control over a complex, interconnected reality, like an economy or a network of nations, you lose the very consent and compliance needed for it to function. Imposing a theoretically perfect, rigid system creates friction, hardship, and unintended consequences that ultimately weaken your own structure from within. The Continental System, meant to be Britain's cage, becomes a prison for the continent, sowing the seeds of future revolts and betrayals among your own uneasy allies. Ask yourself, was this strategic genius identifying a new battleground? Or was it the hubris of believing you could command the tides of global commerce? What price did the continent pay for this war by other means? You decide to extend your control further, looking south to Spain. A seemingly simple strategic maneuver on the vast chessboard of Europe. Its Bourbon king is weak. Its ports crucial for enforcing the Continental System against Britain. And securing your southern flank feels like a necessary safeguard for the empire you are building, piece by piece. You see an opportunity to install your brother, Joseph, on the throne. A reliable placeholder, a loyal vassal. It is a decision made from the height of your power, viewing nations as territories to be managed, borders to be redrawn, kings to be replaced like pawns. What you failed to see, what your strategic vision overlooked entirely, was the Spanish people themselves. You treat the nation like a calculation, ignoring centuries of fierce history, deep-seated culture, and an independence forged in blood and faith. You mistake a government for a nation, a capital for its provinces. The result is not the expected smooth transition of power, but a brutal, relentless, protracted guerrilla war, a festering wound that becomes known across Europe as the Spanish Ulcer. It's an ironic turn. You sought control, but unleashed chaos. Your best marshals find themselves bogged down in an unwinnable conflict against an enemy that melts into the landscape, fighting from hillsides and alleyways. Hundreds of thousands of your veteran troops, vital for the campaigns in Central Europe, are drained away, consumed by the grinding attrition of house-to-house fighting and relentless ambushes. The sheer savagery of the conflict shocks the continent, Atrocities committed by both sides paint a grim picture of modern warfare's dark potential. This is a crucial turning point, not just militarily, but as a vital leadership insight. True strength isn't just about moving armies across a map. It's about understanding the human terrain. You faced not just a Bourbon army, which you could easily defeat in open battle, but an entire nation's visceral will to resist foreign occupation. You could win every pitched battle, occupy every major city, but you couldn't defeat a population fighting house to house, rock to rock, fueled by patriotism, religious fervor, and a deep sense of national identity you dismissed. The moral takeaway is stark, painted in the blood and dust of Spanish villages. Ignoring or holding contempt for the culture, beliefs, and identity of a people you seek to govern or dominate is a recipe for perpetual conflict and ultimately failure. The Spanish tragedy exposed the limits of your power when confronted with non-state resistance and popular uprisings. You were a master of conventional warfare, but the Spanish taught you, brutally, that sometimes the rocks and the peasants are more formidable than any army. Ask yourself, was this strategic logic or blind hubris born of unbroken success? What would you have done, standing in his boots, when the map itself seemed to rise up against you? The gilded doors of the Tuileries Palace swing open, revealing not a battlefield strategist, but a man wrestling with the most intimate of political equations. You stand facing Empress Josephine, the woman who shared your dizzying ascent, the one constant in your life's storm. The decision is wrenching, a necessary sacrifice on the altar of dynastic ambition. She cannot give you an heir, and an empire without a successor is a ship without a rudder, adrift in the tempestuous waters of history. So with a heavy heart, masked by imperial resolve, you divorce her. Europe watches, holding its breath, as you seek a new consort from the ancient houses you once vowed to sweep away. Your gaze falls upon Marie-Louise, daughter of your old nemesis, Emperor Francis I of Austria. It is a breathtaking piece of political chess, marrying into the very lineage you've so often humbled. The union solidifies your place, not just as a conqueror, but as a ruler acknowledged, however grudgingly, by the old world order. The anticipation for an heir hangs heavy in the air, a question mark over your future. Then, in 1811, the cannons roar across Paris, 19 for a daughter, 21 for a son. The full salute echoes through the city, reaching every corner of the vast empire. It's a son. Napoleon Francois Charles Joseph Bonaparte is born, instantly titled the King of Rome. The relief, the elation, is palpable. You finally have him, the living embodiment of your future, the anchor for your newfound legitimacy among kings. This wasn't just a birth. It was the coronation of your dynasty, the transformation from the revolutionary general who seized power to the founder of an imperial line, stretching forward into centuries. It felt, perhaps, like the ultimate validation, proof that your destiny was not only personal, but hereditary, carved into the very fabric of Europe. But here lies the subtle, tragic irony. Achieving this long-sought personal goal, a legitimate son, a dynastic future, doesn't bring contentment or strategic caution. Instead, the presence of the King of Rome seems to embolden you. Your empire feels more permanent, more real, more yours to expand and secure. The weight of ensuring his legacy becomes a driving force, pushing you towards grander, riskier gambles. Why play it safe when the future, personified by your son, feels unassailable? What would you have done, finally holding the tangible proof of your dynasty's potential, with the world seemingly bending to your will? Did the birth of the King of Rome solidify your position, or did it simply convince you that the laws of prudence no longer applied to the man whose destiny was now embodied in a child? It's a chilling thought. Sometimes fulfilling a personal dream can make you blind to the looming storm, convinced that the mere fact of its existence protects you from the lightning. Across Europe, the magnificent structure you built begins to groan. The weight of your empire, the sheer scale of its ambition, presses down, and cracks appear not from external blows, but from the inside out. The Continental System, your grand economic weapon, forged to cripple Britain, becomes a vice, squeezing the life out of your allies and subjects. Ports stand empty, ships rot at anchor, and once wealthy merchants across Holland, the Hanseatic cities, and Italy face ruin. Resentment brews, a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of forced loyalty. You feel this pressure, perhaps as a subtle friction, a delay in reports, a muted enthusiasm in allied capitals. The constant demand for troops, for resources, for absolute adherence to your will exhausts even the most loyal. Your marshals, the battle-hardened titans who delivered your victories, are weary. They long for peace, for respite, for a moment to enjoy the spoils of 2 decades of relentless warfare. But the machine demands more. Even your own blood. The brothers you placed on thrones from Spain to Naples, from Holland to Westphalia, prove frustratingly human. You envisioned them as extensions of your hand, ruling solely for the glory and benefit of Paris. But they are kings now, surrounded by local interests, subject to their own subjects' needs, and they begin to rule for their kingdoms, not strictly yours. Jerome in Westphalia spends lavishly. Louis in Holland sympathizes too much with his blockaded merchants. Joseph in Spain struggles endlessly and requires vast support. This divergence, this lack of absolute conformity from even your family, is a source of deep frustration and mistrust. You placed them there, gave them crowns, expecting unwavering instruments of your will, and they exhibit independence. This phase reveals a crucial, perhaps tragic insight. An empire built purely on coercion, on personal power and demanding obedience without offering reciprocal benefit or acknowledging local realities, is inherently unstable. It's a machine held together by force, not shared purpose or prosperity. The strain of maintaining absolute control across such a vast, diverse territory becomes immense, like trying to hold 1,000 wild horses by their reins simultaneously. You could command the battlefield, but you could not command human nature or the ancient pull of national interest. Here lies the quiet tragedy, the creeping strategic blindness. You believed your will alone, the force of your personality, the might of your armies, could indefinitely suppress discontent. Leadership based solely on projection of power and demanding without providing creates deep-seated animosity. Ignoring the accumulating grievances of those you rule, the bankrupt merchant, the conscripted peasant, the exhausted marshal, the chafing allied ruler, is a sign that the brilliance is clouding over, replaced by a dangerous faith in your own infallibility. Ask yourself, When does demanding obedience become strategic suicide? When does the facade of control hide the truth of crumbling foundations? The empire is not just cracking. It is groaning under its own impossible weight. The air between Paris and St. Petersburg grows thin, brittle with unspoken resentments. Relations with Tsar Alexander I have curdled. He chafes under the yoke of the Continental System, the economic lifeblood of Russia slowly strangling under your blockade. And then there is Poland. You see the Grand Duchy of Warsaw as a strategic buffer, a potential wellspring of soldiers. He sees it as a ghost rising from the grave on his very border, a terrifying premonition of Polish independence, a threat to his western territories. Every intercepted report detailing Russia's wavering commitment to the blockade feels like a personal slight, a direct challenge not just to your system, but to you. Frustration boils over. Ego whispers temptations of ultimate power. You have marched from Italy to the Danube, from the sands of Egypt to the snows of Austerlitz. Your army, the Grande Armée, seems invincible, forged in fire and victory. Surely, this vast, loose empire of Alexander can offer no true resistance. Driven by this potent cocktail of pique, overconfidence, and a fundamental misreading of both the man and his land, you make the ultimate gamble. The decision hardens. Russia must be brought to heel, decisively, utterly. You will invade. The scale of your ambition is breathtaking, even terrifying. You assemble the Grand Army, a force of over 600,000 souls drawn from across Europe, a kaleidoscope of nations pointed eastward, towards the horizon of the unknown. It is the largest army the continent has ever witnessed, a shimmering, dangerous leviathan poised on the edge of the vast Russian plains. This is arguably the most catastrophic decision of your unparalleled career. It is a stark, glaring example of leadership failure, allowing personal pique, the burning need to punish defiance, and a blinding overconfidence to utterly override strategic common sense. You chose a war of immense logistical difficulty, not against a conventional foe seeking a pitched battle, but against a force known for its evasiveness, against a nation willing to burn its own land, against a landscape so vast and unforgiving it swallows armies whole. This decision highlights a dangerous delusion, the belief that past successes, however glorious, somehow guarantee future victory, especially when facing entirely new challenges. Different terrain, different tactics, different climate, a different scale of opponent. The insight here is brutal in its simplicity. Greatness is often undone not by external enemies who meet you head-on, but by internal flaws allowed to fester. In this case, an inability to tolerate defiance and a hubris so profound it blinded you to the sheer, unyielding power of the environmental and logistical challenge ahead. What would you have done, standing at the pinnacle of European power, faced with a king who dared to defy your will? Was this the act of a strategic genius correcting an errant vassal, or the fatal stamp of a man whose pride demanded a price the world could not pay? The drums beat a thunderous rhythm as you stand on the banks of the Niemen River in June 1812. Before you stretches the vast, enigmatic expanse of Russia. Behind you, arrayed across the horizon, is the Grande Armée, the largest army Europe has ever seen, over 600,000 strong, a dazzling mosaic of nationalities from across your sprawling empire. You feel the weight of history, the sheer, terrifying power at your command. This, you believe, is the final piece of the puzzle, the force that will compel Tsar Alexander to yield, to rejoin your continental system, to cement your dominance over the continent. You envision a swift, decisive campaign, a few grand battles like Austerlitz or Friedland, forcing the enemy into a negotiated peace before the harsh Russian winter can bite. The order is given. The vast column begins to cross. But almost immediately, the vastness asserts its will. The initial march is a brutal, soul-crushing slog. Roads are poor, water is scarce, and the promised quick victory becomes a mirage. The Russians refuse to stand and fight. You push forward, expecting confrontation, seeking the pitched battle that is your strategic hallmark, the arena where your genius for concentration and timing shines brightest. But they simply melt away. Villages are abandoned. Supplies are meager or burned. The land itself seems to recoil from your advance. It's a frustrating, insidious form of resistance. Your massive army, designed for overwhelming force in a single point, finds nothing to overwhelm. It's like trying to punch fog. This reveals a profound, almost cruel irony. The very scale of your ambition and the instrument you built to achieve it become liabilities. That colossal army requires an equally colossal amount of food, water, and fodder every single day. Your logistical system, honed for the denser, more manageable distances of Central Europe, is stretched thinner than a thread across a chasm. Supply lines become impossibly long and vulnerable. Disease, dysentery, typhus, stalks the ranks, a silent, invisible enemy, more deadly than any Russian cavalry charge. Men and horses begin to die in horrifying numbers, not from combat, but from exhaustion, starvation, and sickness. The Grande Armée, this magnificent machine of conquest, begins to fray at the edges, then in its core. The troops, drawn from 24 different peoples, speaking a babel of tongues, lose cohesion. The shared purpose, the belief in inevitable victory that bound them together, erodes with every dusty, fruitless mile. Morale plummets as the vision of a quick, glorious triumph dissolves into a grinding, endless pursuit across an empty, hostile land. You chase a ghost, a retreating phantom that drains your strength with every step deeper into its domain. The surprising, devastating truth emerges. Size alone is not enough against an enemy who refuses to play by your rules, who understands how to weaponize space and time. Your tactical brilliance was forged in the crucible of concentrated battles, but Russia offers no such opportunity in these crucial opening months. This is the critical pivot, the moment where strategic rigidity begins to exact its terrible price. You were attempting to fight a classic European war of maneuver and decisive engagement against an enemy who instinctively understood the power of retreating into their own immense, inhospitable backyard. Your reliance on past successes, your inability or unwillingness to fundamentally adapt your strategy to the specific, brutal reality of the Russian landscape and their Fabian tactics becomes a fatal flaw. You expected a chessboard. They gave you an endless, shifting desert. Ask yourself, when has your past success blinded you to a new challenge? When has clinging to a familiar tactic led you into disaster against a problem that demanded a completely different approach? Here, marching deeper into the Russian trap, Napoleon is demonstrating the peril of believing that what worked before will always work, regardless of the context. He is pursuing a retreating army into oblivion, mistaking distance covered for progress made, believing that sheer momentum can overcome the physics of attrition and the strategic genius of avoidance. The vastness is not just geography, it is a strategy, a weapon wielded by an enemy who knows their land better than you ever could. And with every step east, you are walking further from Vienna, further from Paris, further from the familiar world you conquered, and deeper into a nightmare you could not have imagined. The cold dawn breaks over the Borodino field, a vast, blood-soaked stage stretching before you, just 70 miles west of Moscow. Finally, the Russians stand. They haven't run this time, not entirely. You gather your marshals, issue commands, the Grand Army poised for the decisive blow you've pursued across endless plains. This is it. This is where you will shatter their will. Force Alexander to the table. The battle erupts in a paroxysm of violence unmatched in the wars you have waged. Redoubts fall and are retaken. Cavalry charges crash like tidal waves against infantry squares. Artillery tears flesh and earth with relentless fury. Hours bleed into hours, the air thick with smoke and the screams of dying men. You watch from your command post, directing reserves, seeing the line surge and recoil. It is a grinder, a charnel house on an epic scale. By late afternoon, the field is yours. The Russians have retreated, leaving behind a landscape of unimaginable horror. Tens of thousands of men lie dead or wounded, on both sides. Your own casualties are staggering. Those hardened veterans who marched from France, the core of your army's strength, are decimated. You have won the ground. You have forced the enemy back. But as the smoke begins to clear, a chilling truth emerges. The Russian army, though battered, is not destroyed. It has retreated in order, its structure intact, its spirit unbroken. This is the crushing paradox of Borodino, a tactical victory, a bloody triumph on the battlefield, yet a profound strategic failure. You sought annihilation, the decisive battle that would end the war. Instead, you won a field at an unspeakable cost, bleeding your army white for a positional gain. It is a Pyrrhic victory, a victory that feels more like a defeat in its implications. You spent irreplaceable capital, your most experienced soldiers, for a mere mile or two of ground and the temporary retreat of an army that would fight another day. This moment illuminates a critical lesson, one perhaps hinted at in the endless struggle in Spain. War is not just about defeating the enemy's force on the battlefield. It is about breaking their will, achieving your strategic objective. You destroyed thousands of Russian soldiers at Borodino, but you did not destroy Russia's determination. The smoke and blood obscured the larger picture, the simple, brutal fact that you had not achieved what mattered most. Ask yourself, was this brilliant tactics, blinding strategic oversight? Was the cost worth the barren ground? You ride into Moscow, the ancient heart of Russia, a city fabled in song and legend. You expect grand reception, the boyars bowing, perhaps even the keys to the Kremlin laid at your feet. A symbolic culmination of this vast campaign. You, Napoleon, Emperor of the French, have taken the enemy's capital. The victory feels immense, a jewel in the crown of your conquests, perhaps the leverage needed to finally bring Tsar Alexander to terms. But the silence is deafening, heavier than the thunder of your cannon ever was. The streets are eerily empty, drained of life like blood from a wound. Only a few stragglers, the poor, the old, remain amidst the ghosts of the departed populace. This is not the triumph you envisioned. It is a hollow shell, a stage set for a play where the main actors have fled. Then the smoke begins to rise, not from celebratory bonfires, but from uncontrolled, ravenous flames. Fires spring up across the city, first isolated plumes, then merging into a fiery ocean. The scale is apocalyptic. Was it the retreating Russians, scorched earth patriots denying you shelter and supplies? Was it criminal elements seizing the chaos, or simply the inevitable result of abandoned wooden buildings and panicked flight? You occupy the Kremlin, the ancient fortress, but it feels less like a seat of power and more like a bunker in a war zone. Around you, your grand army, already weary and diminished by the relentless march and skirmishes, now finds itself surrounded by ashes and ruin, supplies becoming even scarcer. You send emissaries to the Tsar, waiting, expecting the news of his capitulation. Surely, the loss of Moscow, this symbol of Russian identity, must break his will. Surely, he will negotiate now. But Alexander, thousands of miles away in St. Petersburg, remains defiant. He refuses to parley. He refuses to acknowledge your presence in his burning city. He simply waits. Weeks turn into a month. The golden domes of Moscow crumble or blacken. Your soldiers scavenge amongst the ruins, their morale eroding like stone in acid rain. The promised winter, the infamous General Winter, begins to stir, its icy breath chilling the air. A silent, implacable foe, far more dangerous than any Cossack charge. You, Napoleon, the master of speed and decisive action, are trapped in inertia, waiting in a ghost city for a response that will never come. The magnificent victory of occupying Moscow is revealed for what it is: a strategic cul-de-sac, a magnificent, empty gesture that has cost precious time, resources, and lives. This moment is a brutal lesson in the difference between symbols and substance. Taking Moscow was a powerful symbol, a headline-grabbing act, but it wasn't the strategic objective that mattered. The real goal was to destroy the Russian army, to force the Tsar to submit. By focusing on capturing the capital, you allowed the Russian forces to escape, to retreat deeper into their vast territory, preserving their strength. While you sat in the burnt husk of Moscow, congratulating yourself on taking the prize, the true enemies, distance, logistics, and the approaching winter, were quietly, relentlessly dismantling your army. The empty palace is a tragically ironic metaphor for the victory itself, grand in appearance, utterly devoid of the actual power or leverage you desperately needed. Ask yourself, how often do we chase the symbolic win, the promotion, the title, the accumulation of possessions, while neglecting the true fundamental goals, the substance of success, be it strategic positioning, logistical preparation, or understanding the real challenges we face? Moscow, the empty prize, stands as a monument to this fatal distraction. While you waited for diplomatic victory in a city of ashes, the fate of your army and your empire was being sealed, not by enemy soldiers, but by the silent, unstoppable forces of reality you chose to ignore. What would you have done, standing in his boots, realizing the emptiness of the victory and the growing shadow of winter? Too late. The order finally comes, the word you resisted uttering for weeks: retreat. You turn your back on the smoldering ruins of Moscow, a city that offered no solace, only a hollow crown. Autumn is giving way, But the transition is abrupt, brutal. General Winter, the ally of the Tsar, arrives not as a slow creeping chill, but as a sudden, violent assault. The first snowflakes are not a gentle prelude, but a furious harbinger. Your Grande Armée, once the vibrant, unstoppable tide of Europe, is already a phantom of its former self. Marches into Russia, stretched supply lines to breaking point. Hunger gnawed at their bellies before the snow even began to fall. Disease, typhus, dysentery had already thinned the ranks more effectively than any battle. Skirmishes and exhaustion further eroded strength and spirit. Now they face an enemy they cannot see, cannot fight with bayonets or cannons. The biting, merciless cold, the suffocating snow, the treacherous ice. The retreat is not an orderly withdrawal. It is a slow-motion catastrophe. The carefully constructed machine of war disintegrates day by frozen day. The roads become corridors of agony, littered with abandoned cannons, broken carts, and the bodies of men and horses. The scorched earth policy enacted by the Russians means there are no supplies, no shelter, only an endless white wilderness that mirrors the emptiness growing in your heart. Soldiers, wrapped in rags or looted finery, freeze in their sleep. They starve, gnawing on frozen horseflesh, if they are lucky. Frostbite claims limbs, blinding blizzards, disorientation. As the army collapses inward, becoming less a cohesive force and more a desperate shuffling mass, external pressures intensify. Cossack light cavalry, swift and elusive, harry the flanks relentlessly, picking off stragglers like wolves on a wounded herd. Peasant militias, armed with whatever they can find, emerge from the woods to prey on the weak and isolated. Morale plummets into the permafrost. Loyalty becomes a luxury. Survival is the only coin of the realm. The famed discipline of the Grande Armée dissolves under the brutal hammer of nature and the gnawing teeth of starvation. You watch, sometimes from a distance, sometimes riding amongst the wreckage, as the empire you built on speed, logistics, and morale is dismantled by frostbite and hunger. The crossing of the Berezina River becomes the horrifying, defining tableau of the entire campaign's failure. Here, facing a river only partially frozen, under constant assault from converging Russian forces, amidst the chaos of floating ice floes, tens of thousands are trapped. Engineers work heroically to build pontoon bridges, but the bottleneck is immense, the panic absolute. Men, women following the army, and horses plunge into the freezing water, crushed in the press, or fall under artillery fire. It is not a battle, but a slaughter, a desperate, every man for himself, struggle against the elements and a closing trap. The screams, the snapping ice, the relentless boom of cannons. It is a soundscape of utter despair. This is the starkest depiction of the limits of human will against the indifference of nature and geography. Your genius for organization, your legendary speed of movement, your ability to inspire men to superhuman feats, all are rendered useless against starvation, disease, and frostbite. Logistics, the mundane science of getting food and warmth to soldiers, is ignored, neglected in the surge towards conquest. You believe your will, your strategic brilliance, could conquer anything, even the vastness of Russia and the timing of its winter. This is the insight delivered with crushing finality. Ignoring fundamental environmental realities and logistical necessities, believing your desire alone can bend the physical world to your command leads not to victory, but to total breakdown, to annihilation. The moral reflection is brutal. Cold as the Russian steppe itself, nature bats last. Hubris in the face of fundamental physical constraints, the belief that you command destiny itself, results not in triumph, but in catastrophe. The frozen landscape of Russia became the tombstone of your overweening ambition, a monument not to victory, but to the harsh, unforgiving lesson that even the most powerful man on earth cannot command the weather or bend the physical world to his desires indefinitely. You stand amidst the ruins of your army, the wind howling, and the silence of the dead is a profound, echoing judgment on your ambition. Ask yourself, was the initial conquest brilliance, or was the refusal to recognize limits the true, fatal flaw? What would you have done, standing in his boots, watching your empire turn to ice? You race back, leaving the frozen desolation of Russia behind, a landscape littered with the ghosts of 500,000 men. Paris greets you with a mixture of relief and dread. The Grand Army, the instrument of your dominance, is shattered. Now, in a desperate gambit, you drain the last reserves of French youth, raising fresh battalions, boys barely out of school, their eyes still wide with battlefield innocence, rather than tempered by veteran cunning. You call them the Marie-Louises, a poignant, almost cruel nickname for the wives and mothers they leave behind, or perhaps for the innocents they represent. These aren't the hardened warriors who stood with you at Austerlitz or Jena. They are a fragile shield against a world scenting blood. The news of the Russian catastrophe echoes across Europe, not just as a military defeat, but as the shattering of a myth. For years, your name alone instilled fear, a silent threat that held kings and emperors in line. Your invincibility wasn't just a reputation. It was the mortar holding your vast, disparate empire together. Now, the first crack appears, and it spreads like lightning. Prussia, your reluctant ally, sees the opening. King Frederick William III, humiliated for years, defects with stunning speed, signing a treaty with Russia. This isn't just an enemy. It's a betrayal, a punch felt deep in the core of your continental system. Austria, led by the calculating Metternich, begins to pivot, subtly shifting from wary ally to potential adversary. Your own father-in-law, Emperor Francis I, watches, weighing family ties against dynastic survival and the lure of recovering lost territories. Across the Channel, Britain, the steadfast island nation you could never reach, redoubles its efforts. British gold pours into the coffers of your enemies, fueling their resolve, knitting together the disparate threads of European resentment into a formidable cord. This new coalition isn't a hastily assembled force like those you've so often dismantled. It's stronger, more unified by a common purpose: to break you, finally and completely. Years of forced subservience, of humiliation, of national pride wounded. All this pent-up fury finds its voice. The tide hasn't merely turned. It's begun to surge with relentless force. You stand, momentarily, in Paris, attempting to shore up the crumbling edifice of your power. But the foundation has been eroded not by a single grand battle lost in the heart of Europe, but by the slow, agonizing dissolution of your army, and more importantly, your aura, in the vast, unforgiving expanse of Russia. The bitter irony, your relentless pursuit of absolute control, which crushed dissent and forced alliances through sheer power, meant that when your power seemed to waver, there was no reservoir of loyalty to draw upon, only years of suppressed anger waiting for the opportune moment to erupt. Ask yourself, Is true strength the ability to command obedience through fear, or to inspire cooperation through shared purpose? The unraveling begins because the myth of your invincibility is dead, replaced by the stark reality of your vulnerability. And when the central power source appears fragile, an empire built on fear and forced alliances will quickly, dramatically, start to crumble. The autumn earth around Leipzig is a chessboard scaled to monstrous proportions, but this time the pieces are living men, and the board is tilted against you. It is 1813, and you stand before a convergence of fate, the combined armies of Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden. This isn't a skirmish, it is the Völkerschlacht, the Battle of Nations, the largest clash the Napoleonic Wars have ever seen. Nearly 500,000 souls are gathered here, a human tide surging towards your position. You survey your lines, a vast host, yes, but you see the difference. These are the raw recruits, the conscripts pulled from every corner of your straining empire. They possess courage, perhaps, but not the hardened professionalism, the intuitive discipline of the veterans you lost, shattered like glass against the relentless sun of Spain and buried beneath the Russian snows. Your tactical genius, the swift, decisive maneuvers that rewrote the rules of war for a decade, is still sharp, but the instrument is dull, the edge gone. For 3 brutal days, the thunder of cannons shakes the very ground. You fight with characteristic tenacity, attempting to exploit gaps, to turn flanks, to impose your will as you always have. But they have learned. Your enemies, once divided and easily outmaneuvered, now move with a terrible coordination. They have studied your campaigns, adapted your methods, and now they wield the crushing weight of numbers and a newfound unity, forged in the fire of shared grievance. Your raw levies falter under the sustained pressure, unable to execute the complex choreography of veteran troops. You are outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and for the first time on German soil in a pitched battle of this scale, clearly, undeniably bested. The retreat is not a strategic withdrawal. It is the acknowledgement of an irreversible defeat. Leipzig is more than a lost battle. It is the physical embodiment of the political storm you yourself have brewed. This united front, this overwhelming force, is the culmination of years of overreach. Every imposed blockade, every annexed territory, every humiliated monarch added another strand to the rope tightening around your neck. The insight is brutal in its simplicity. Sustained overextension doesn't just deplete resources, it poisons the well of international goodwill. It weakens the very quality of your instruments, and it grants your opponents the most precious commodity: time to learn, adapt, and consolidate their strength. The moral reflection is stark. Past brilliance, the echoes of Austerlitz or Jena, are no substitute for current strength and facing a continent united against you. A leader who believes their own legend too much, who pushes their advantage until it becomes tyranny, eventually faces a reckoning where accumulated resentments and superior numbers overcome individual brilliance. The Battle of Nations wasn't just a military disaster. It was the crushing weight of the political coalition your own actions had meticulously, tragically forged against you. Ask yourself, when does ambition cross the line into overreach? And what is the true cost of winning every battle if you lose the peace? What would you have done, standing there, watching the inevitable dawn of defeat break over the Leipzig battlefield? Following the bloodbath at Leipzig, the tides of war crash onto the very shores of France. You, the emperor, stand on your own soil, facing a continent united against you. The Allied armies advance relentlessly, a vast, implacable force. But here, in this desperate winter of 1814, you conjure one last, astonishing performance. You fight a defensive campaign that analysts still study today, the campaign of France. With a fraction of your former strength, you display flashes of that old, terrifying genius. You leverage the terrain, the rivers, the sheer speed of your movements, winning several smaller victories against enemy corps double or triple your size. Champaubert, Montmirail, Vauchamp, minor jewels in a crown already fractured, proving you could still outmaneuver and outfight isolated components of the colossal force bearing down. It is a brilliant, desperate rearguard action, a general's masterpiece painted in snow and mud. But it is not enough to halt the avalanche. The weight of numbers is simply too great. More critically, the will of your most trusted lieutenants is finally broken. Your marshals, weary to their bones, having marched and fought across Europe for 20 years, see the futility. They know Paris is undefended, the population exhausted. They refuse to march again, refusing this time to follow you into what they believe is certain, final destruction. The air at Fontainebleau Palace crackles with their dissent, their defiance. This is not the enemy, but your own commanders, refusing to play their part in a drama they know has no winning act left. And then comes the final bitter blow. Marshal Marmont, Duke of Ragusa, one of your earliest companions, defects. He marches his corps to the Allied lines, removing the last significant obstacle between the invaders and the capital. The betrayal stings, not just militarily, but personally. With Paris fallen, your marshals insisting, and key support vanishing, the hand you've played with such audacious skill for 2 decades is finally called. There is no move left on the board. The decision, stark and unavoidable, lands heavily. Abdication. At Fontainebleau, you sign the treaty, renouncing your thrones, French, Italian, everything forged in fire. You accept exile on the small, sun-drenched island of Elba. The empire, built with such monumental ambition, collapses almost overnight. A vast structure reduced to rubble around your ears. This moment is a harsh, undeniable lesson in leadership, knowing when to yield. Your refusal to accept a less favorable peace earlier, clinging to an unwinnable position after Russia or Leipzig, ultimately stripped you of all leverage, leading to this more complete and humiliating downfall. The insight here is brutal. Sometimes, continued resistance, however courageous or brilliant in execution, becomes self-destructive. True strength, a wisdom that perhaps your boundless ambition inherently rejected, can lie in strategic retreat, in recognizing the limits of your power and the moment your hand is truly played. What would you have done facing the combined weight of Europe, the dissent of your closest allies, and the defection of a trusted friend? Ask yourself, was this the tragic end of a warrior, or the inevitable consequence of an ego that refused to acknowledge reality until it was too late to salvage anything more? The moral takeaway? That boundless ambition, while the engine of your rise, became the blindfold that prevented you from accepting a less severe outcome when wisdom, not will, was required. Exile weighs like a heavy cloak on Elba. The endless blue of the sea feels less like freedom and more like a cage, From this small island, you watch France, a grand theater, where the Bourbons stumble upon a stage set for a different kind of performance. Whispers of discontent reach your ears like sea spray. The restored monarchy, the returning émigrés clinging to past privileges, the disillusionment of a people who tasted glory and now face mediocrity. You calculate. The timing feels right. The ambition, never truly extinguished, flares anew, a burning coal beneath the ashes of defeat. You decide. The stage calls again. This is not just a desire to rule. It is a visceral need to be Napoleon, the one who defies gravity, who commands loyalty not through title, but through sheer force of will and shared history. You sense the bond with the soldiers, the veterans who marched through Europe under your eagle. You believe, with a certainty that borders on delusion, that they will answer the call. This decision to leave Elba is the ultimate gamble. A throw of the dice against fate itself. You are betting everything on the loyalty of troops ordered to arrest you, on the fatigue of Europe, on the enduring power of your own legend. And initially, the gamble pays off with breathtaking audacity. You land near Cannes with a small force, a ripple becoming a tidal wave. Troops sent to intercept you, led by marshals who swore allegiance to the king. Instead, turn and cheer. You march north, the flight of the eagle, a journey unprecedented in history. Cities open their gates, regiments flock to your banner. Paris falls without a shot fired in anger against you. It is a masterclass in charisma, in understanding the deep currents of loyalty and resentment flowing through France. It seems impossible. A fallen emperor walking back onto his throne, carried by the will of the people and the army. But this rapid ascent carries its own tragic irony. The ease with which you reclaim power masks a profound, fatal reality. The world has moved on. The allies who once squabbled are now united by a common fear and a common resolve. They don't see a legitimate ruler. They see an outlaw, a disruptive force that must be neutralized at all costs. The moment you set foot on French soil, the drums of war begin to beat across Europe, a synchronized thunder that your seemingly effortless return cannot drown out. Your belief in your destiny, your magnetic pull on the army, blinds you to this critical shift. You haven't fundamentally changed the behaviors, the refusal to compromise, the insatiable drive for ultimate power that led to your initial downfall. Ask yourself, was this astonishing return proof of unbreakable destiny, or the desperate act of a man who couldn't bear to be ordinary, even in exile? The allure of this grand comeback, the 100 days, is undeniable, a final, dazzling display of courage and charisma. But it's a performance played out on the precipice of doom. It demonstrates that sometimes the greatest challenge isn't reaching the summit, but staying there when the ground beneath you has shifted, and a united world is determined to pull you down. This refusal to accept the verdict of history, this ambition that could not conceive of a life without ultimate power, sets an irreversible course, one that leads directly to a Belgian field called Waterloo. You are exiled again. The sea stretches to every horizon, a vast, indifferent barrier. St. Helena, a speck in the Atlantic, a cage built of distance and waves. No armies march here, no crowns are seized, no treaties are signed. Your days are a quiet, grinding rhythm of reflection, dictation, and the slow erosion of time. Stripped of all external power, your final battlefield becomes the page, your last weapon, the pen. You spend hours dictating your memoirs, shaping the narrative for posterity. This is not just recounting history, it is forging it. You meticulously craft the legend, the liberal emperor, the son of the revolution, betrayed by kings, thwarted by reactionaries, undone not by your own errors, but by bad luck, disloyal subordinates, and the implacable malice of the English. The defeats are softened, the ambitions framed as noble progress, the ruthless decisions justified by necessity, or painted as the fault of others. It is here, paradoxically, in this profound isolation, that the myth of Napoleon Bonaparte truly takes flight, detaching itself from the complex, flawed, all-too-human man and becoming something larger, cleaner, more heroic. The island is small, but the story you tell from it becomes immense. It's a final, desperate act of control, to command how you will be remembered when you can no longer command men or nations. There is a profound, tragic irony in this. The man who sought to conquer the world now battles only the judgment of future generations, wielding only the fragile power of carefully chosen words. This final act is more than just the fading years of a defeated emperor. It is a masterclass in legacy construction, born from the ultimate cost of an unchecked, blinding self-belief. Your life has been a relentless exploration of ambition, its intoxicating heights and its crushing depths. On St. Helena, this principle finds its starkest expression not in glorious conquest, but in the quiet, desperate act of narrative control. Your story, told from this desolate rock, screams a lesson. While immense ambition can achieve incredible feats, its unchecked form often leads to isolation and ruin, leaving behind only a legacy to be debated, defended, and dissected for centuries. Ask yourself, what if that burning ambition, that absolute certainty in your own destiny, had been tempered by self-awareness, by the ability to truly listen, to trust others not just as tools, and to know when enough was truly enough? History, as you wrote it from St. Helena, offers one answer, a tale of betrayal and misfortune. But the truer lessons are etched in the frozen plains of Russia, the blood-soaked streets of Spain, the quiet resentments of allies forced into line. Your meteoric rise was undeniably powered by genius and indomitable will. Your catastrophic fall, just as surely, was driven by the very same will, untethered from reality, convinced of its own infallibility until the very end. The echoes of your ambition resonate still in the timeless human drive to control, to conquer, to leave an indelible mark. Your life poses the perennial, urgent question: must the pursuit of greatness inevitably require a bargain with forces, hubris, isolation, disregard for others, that ultimately consume the pursuer? What boundaries must ambition respect to build something lasting, something truly great, rather than a brilliant, fleeting, catastrophic reign that collapses under its own weight? History breathes this question with every turn of the page, detailing your life. As you yourself observe, victory is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but that's the way to bet. You bet everything on yourself, on your will, on your belief in your own destiny. And for a time, you won it all. But in the end, the wager, unchecked by wisdom, cost the world dearly and cost you everything. In the quiet confinement of St. Helena, the man faded, but the myth grew. And the story he told, though incomplete and self-serving, became his final conquest. The profound wisdom we gain when we study a life like Napoleon's, honestly, is this: True lasting power isn't just about what you conquer, but about what you build. And perhaps more importantly, what you understand about yourself and the limits of human will. His story is a dazzling, terrifying testament to the power of ambition, and a somber warning about the precipice that unchecked self-belief represents. In the end, it wasn't the battlefield that defeated him, it was believing he couldn't lose.